Well, let's go to our first conversation this afternoon. Now, Chatham House, a United Kingdom international affairs policy think tank, says Nigeria's economy is witnessing its most competitive season in 25 years. This, they say, is coming on the back of President Bola Tinubu's administration's economic reforms, including the devaluation of the naira from 460 naira to about 1,500 naira to a dollar. The organization said Nigeria's currency adjustment is one of the largest anywhere 4 years and is now more competitive for the past 25 years. The Royal Institute stated that President Bola Tinubu's economic reforms gave Nigeria the best hope for sustainable growth for decades, disclosing that the path the reform process took remains crucial for the country's future. Now, according to the organization, the Central Bank of Nigeria has added to its foreign exchange reserves, which has exceeded $40 billion, as well as having an adequate stock of reserves, the requirements for stability in the developing countries. Now, the think tank Royal Institute stressed that controlling inflation remains a pressing challenge for Nigerian lawmakers, especially since the urban poor are the hardest hit. According to that same report, a valuable naira would help to reduce inflation by making imports cheaper in local currency. Now, joining me via Zoom is the... All right. Well, says it looks competitive. I think that's the word from them. Should I ask you, how does this come to you first in its generality?
Yeah, thank you so very much. Now, when I first read that report, what came to my mind was a conversation I was involved in sometime in year 2007, when we were finalizing the financial sector strategy for year 2020. And I recall by the time we came to an international conference to review the recommendations and all, there was this indication from one of the Bretton Woods institutions that why should we aim for year 2020? Why shouldn't Nigeria aim for 2025? And of course, their own calculation then was that by year 2025, and that is what makes this Chatham House report interesting to me. What they said in their own estimation was that by this year, Nigeria will become so important to the global economy that any international investor that has no Nigerian strategy, that was the way they put it, a Nigerian strategy, will not be competitive globally. In which case, it wouldn't matter where you operate from in the world, but I must have a strategy to be a part of what is happening in Nigeria by year 2025. And I recall vividly the then Central Bank governor, and that is Professor Charles Soludo, who now made a remark on that and said, we are aiming at year 2020 because we're a country in a hurry. So now, if I play that back, that happened some 18 years ago, what it speaks to me is that as of today, we are going in the right direction. That is where I interpret what Chatham House has said in this instance. Rolling back to year 2000, they made reference to that between then and now, this is the time that our economy has become very, very competitive internationally, which means we are making the right course. We are also in the right direction. So from my own interpretation there, what it means is the speed. So it resonates well with me.
There's a warning here. They're saying Nigeria should not strengthen the naira. We should not try to strengthen the naira. That it's more competitive with the present depreciation. Now, you can make us understand this better, Dr. Adedikwe.
All right, thank you very much. For me, it simply means, look, Nigeria, don't reverse the reforms that you have adopted. You are in the right direction. Don't reverse it. Also, Central Bank of Nigeria, take our counsel here, continue on the path you are on, orthodox monetary policy. They continue to strengthen what you have done thus far, especially between December 2024 and January 2025. And that is market efficiency and transparency, and of course, effectiveness, which speaks to right behavior. That if we can sustain this, Nigeria will not need to return to administrative fixing of exchange rates and administrative fixing of interest rates. That rather, let the market determine where those prices will be. So that is my own interpretation of what they have said, which is not any different anyway from what we are also counseling our own government. That there's no point reversing the reforms. Rather, let's interrogate it further and see what needs to be improved in order for us to get the full benefits promised by the reforms.
Now, doing a bit of research, I saw that this kind of how would I put it, adjustment to the currency, if I'm to use that word, or depreciation. Only a country like Ethiopia has done that. Ethiopia Bear. We see that they've also had that kind of big move recently. So moving forward, sustaining this is something that is very key. What are those sort of interventions? Because the man on the street would just look at these figures or look at what Chatham House is saying like, well, that doesn't really put food on my table. Now, how do we make the man on the street understand that we are headed somewhere and this growth will be inclusive?
Very good. Now, whenever you do such deep reforms as we have done in Nigeria in the last 1.5 years, what typically follows is social investment. Social investment means interventions in spaces that will enhance the real value of the currency. And how does that mean? It means, yes, we've seen inflation rates at very high double digits, okay? But of course, rebasing inflation rate brought it from 34.8 to 24.48. Now, we must not misinterpret that. It doesn't in any way mean inflation rate in Nigeria has dropped. What we have seen is a rebasing effect. The real proof that inflation has dropped is when we see the data for February, March going forward. But what this speaks to for the man on the road is simply this, that what I need to put out to buy the normal things my family consumes is such that what I earn will be adequate to take care of my family needs. How will that happen? That means in all of our commodity markets, especially for foodstuffs and the regular consumables that families consume, as much as possible, we want to intensify the production of that and ensure what is produced turns into supply. Supply is what comes into the market. If that supply expands significantly, then the price per unit will drop. So it means the reforms are good because they send a very clear picture that want to allow the market to drive things, all right? The same market that drives prices, which is what the common man is complaining about, we also drive investments if the right incentives are put in place. And of course, like we rightly said, whatever you want people to do, put an incentive. There is a basic principle in economics. Anything you want people to do, put incentives. So if we want to see more food in the market to cause food prices to depress, then we need to bring more food into the market, not necessarily by way of importing. I will support the idea of producing more locally here because of several benefits of it. You are creating jobs. Of course, you are bringing more food into the market. That will, of course, affect, prices, which is good for the common man, which is the ultimate target. So we should not therefore be carried away that rebate inflation has dropped from 30-something to 20-something. But rather, how do we enhance the real value of the currency. That is what matters to the common man. So we must get more food into the market. Importing them is not sustainable because in a way that we find a back route to put pressure on the exchange value of the naira. So in which case, everything we do must be focused on producing more locally and therefore supplying the market from that local output.
Now, there is also two key strategies, instituted or like an advice from the Chatham House. Yes. They are saying that Nigeria must enhance its monetary transmission mechanism. That's one. They are also saying that we must increase public revenues. Two important points there. So how do we go about that too? If we are not going to increase taxes, when you talk about public revenue, Nigerians will be worried about taxes. And we have a tax reform already ongoing, a lot of back and forth with regards to that committee. So how will you also help us address that?
Okay. Now, the solutions to most problems appear simple. But that a solution is simple doesn't mean it is easy to execute. But for me, the line out of this is this. If you look at our tax basket, how many registered businesses are in that basket? That's number one. Then how many income earners for private individuals are in the tax basket? So that means the focus should be on how to get more taxpayers into the basket. The solution is not in increasing the rate. And that is what our governments must continually put out to people so that we can see the tax reforms in the right sense of it. It should not be about increasing rates. In fact, like originally recommended by the committee that the president put in place for this, the corporate income tax rate can actually drop and yet revenue is expanding. It's a function of how many taxpayers are in the basket. And also it's good the way the government is going about it, bringing more and more of technology to play in the process. The more we apply technology in the process, the more difficult it is for companies and individuals to evade tax. So if tax evasion is therefore nearly eliminated and reduced significantly because of the application of technology, then we have chances of growing public revenue. Now, the other flip side to it is this, and this is what I find even more interesting, that whenever your economy is growing, ideally, we see your public revenue also grow. So if there is a disconnect between them, that means there are leakages in the system, which in my own view is what these tax reforms intend to address. So which means that if we are able to grow this economy as envisaged, we have every opportunity, therefore, of also growing public revenue. And it then means we want to plug leakages on the one hand, and then spending will be focused more on creating value, which means we must invest in those hard and soft infrastructure that I usually refer to as enablers of economic activities. So the more money every corporate entity makes, the more tax they also pay. And that is the way these things connect. So the government must be clearly focused on what it wants to do. It's not in increasing public revenue by raising tax rates. Rather, it's about getting more taxpayers in the basket and ensuring there's value for money when they spend, so that when people pay taxes, companies pay taxes, they see what government is using the money for. That creates what they call the social compact. Social compact will make people become more committed to fulfilling their statutory obligations with respect to taxation and other government dues.
Another thing that worries me when I look at comments from international agencies, organizations like this one, is the fact that Nigeria is still import dependent. We are dependent on importation, and that scares me. So with all the efforts all the while, Dr. Adedipe, you've been talking about this for some time. How well do you also see our being dependent on imports affecting our currency?
Well, if we go by the data we have available as of today, that narrative is changing gradually. And I will use two things to illustrate.
Okay.
Yes, the dollar value of our imports may not have increased significantly, but because of the devaluation of the naira value of our imports has increased. I took a quick peek at the figures just before this conversation began. And I saw an increase in 2024 compared to 2023 of our monthly import bill by 2.6 times, in fact, about 2.62 times. We had about 2.5 trillion monthly average in 2023, and we had about 6.4 trillion naira average monthly for 2024. So which means our import has increased, no doubt. But there's also an interesting thing there. When you break down our imports, compare 23 with 24, you find that in 2023, 39.1% of our merchandise imports were refined petroleum products. But when you check out the trade data, which we had the final quarter published last week for 2024, you discover that refined petroleum products import for Nigeria in the whole of 2024 dropped to 27.1% of our merchandise imports, which means even our imports in terms of structure is changing. And the reason is a reflection of the value of the naira, the exchange value of the naira, and also some things happening in the economy. Domestic refineries, especially with the leadership now of Dangote Refinery, now refining products and therefore reducing our dependence on importation of refined products. So what does this mean in terms of strategy? That means, as we have said repeatedly, you mentioned it over the years, that we need to go strategic in this instance. Yes, it's good to import because the import volume is not what is really important here. What is more important is what you import. If most of our imports are intermediate products, and then what we refer to as machineries, plants, and spare parts, that is in the right direction because those enhance production locally. The more we produce locally, the better for the economy. Because if we expand production locally, it means our future import will also reduce for consumption items. Okay. The other side to it is that some of the equipment that we also import might actually be to produce for export. So in which case, we are deliberate in the direction we are going at. So ultimately then, if we import, is there a possibility of using that to enhance what we produce to export to African countries under the Continental Free Trade Agreement? So that is the way I'm looking at this. So export then is focused on Africa, but import is focused on how can we produce more to take care of what we consume locally, that is, now produce those ones, and also import what we require to produce and export. So if export is shifted in that direction, then our economy will be going in the right way.
Before I let you go, Dr. Adedipe, I know we've spoken before now about the budget, our budget 2025, but many are still talking about the debt side and deficit, of course. That's the worrisome part of that document, and everyone is talking about it, that how do we intend to fund this debt, the deficit of this document, this spending plan for 2025. I don't know if you would like to react to that and what you make of that, of the actualization of the document in its totality.
Well, for me, what I've seen so far, first and foremost, looking at the budget, yes, at 54.99 trillion naira, yes, that's quite significant, highest ever in our history. The second part of it is, of course, some critics will say, if you convert that to dollars, about $36.66 billion, that it is not as high as what is in some other countries, especially even in Africa. All of that is good, okay? You can call them, using the word, you want to interpret the data and tell a story you want with it, but I look at it differently. Now, if I look at that, I look at the proportion of that budget that goes for capital spending. Then capital spending at over 40% is a change of the story of budget in Nigeria in the last 15 years, all right? So which means that, again, in terms of the structure of the budget, we are pulling in the right direction on the one hand. So, but the second thing is that if you look also at the percentage of the deficit compared to the spending, it is lower than what we had in 2024 or 2023, which means also it's in the right direction. But one thing I always remind people is this: if you want growth with the way Nigeria is currently, you cannot shy away from borrowing. What is important here is if we borrow, let every borrowed naira be tied to projects. So it is focused on projects delivery. And the more you deliver projects that are development centered or centric, let me say, it means you are building capacity today with the borrowed funds in order to grow your economy in an inclusive and strong manner in subsequent years. So for me, therefore, I'm not worried about deficit in that budget. What I'm worried about is what produces the deficit. If it is not required spending, I'm good for it. And then the spending, of course, is focused on projects that will enable economic actors to produce more. And then we see the benefits show up in public finance, show up also in growth of the economy and every other thing we can now infer from there.
Dr. Adedipe, I must thank you so much for your time as always. Thank you for joining the program. Founder, Chief Consultant, B. Adedipe Associates Limited. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Olu, and I'm happy to be here always.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, still to come on the show, we will look at Nigeria's Employers Consultative Association's reaction to some burning economic issues. Of course, as it affects the private